Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Black Templars Marshall. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon page is a link below, and on to the video. Thanks for watching. First colour that we're going to use is Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to use this to do parts of the cloak, the casing for the gun. Also got his eye lenses and a few other little details. We get a nice smooth layer of Mephiston Red on there. If you've been looking at these Black Templars figures, I think they are really great, like the details on them, the look of them. Not going to have a force myself, but we'll be painting up some of these, as they are really good looking miniatures. Now I'm going to use Citadel Baneblade Brown. I'm going to use this to do his belt. Well, the belt does have skulls on, but you'll see a little bit later on how I'm going to paint those up. But for this part, if you just paint the whole thing with Baneblade Brown, we can do the skulls a little bit later. Next up, we're going to be using some Citadel Iron Hands Steel. I failed to show this in the video, but Iron Hands Steel for all the silvery metallic parts on this. You will note that the handrail on the combi bolt rifle is black at the moment. I'm going to be painting that red, so if you haven't painted that red already, just add that. It's a little bit that I missed. And also the kind of ribbon flying from his shoulder there as well, I do that in red too. Now using Citadel Rakarth Flesh. Using this to do the tabard on the front and the back. Also to do the base coat for the skeleton, which is hanging around on his power pack. Like so. Now we're going to start on the gold, so we're going to use Citadel Retributor Armour. There's plenty of gold detailing, some little bits on the pauldrons. Got a few little icons and different bits like that dotted around. You can see the head on this guy isn't the one with the kind of crown thing or the respirator. It's actually just one of the normal Black Templars heads from the box that came out. And that's because I'm doing this one for my brother, who likes to have his Marines with the lids on. So this guy has got the normal Templar's helm. Now using Vallejo White to paint up the pauldrons. I was going to use this to paint up the inside of the cloak as well. Next up, a little bit of Citadel Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this to do the skeleton and also the Rakarth flesh that we used on the tabard on the front and back. I'm trying not to use too much here, I'm just giving it a bit of a darker colour rather than letting it pool in the recesses too much. I'm trying to get a bit more of a smooth transition on the Rakarth flesh and highlights to the shades. So I'm just kind of toning them down rather than splashing it all on like I usually do. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Apothecary White Contrast. I'm going to use this for the pauldrons and also the cloak. Very quick and easy way to do a cloak. This, like a white cloak or a red cloak, so I'll do a couple little videos on those. It's a very simple way of doing them. Next up, Citadel Snakebite Leather Contrast. We're going to use this on the belt. As I said earlier, we're going to be doing the skulls in a metallic colour. We're going to be using Model Air Chrome for those. But for the time being, we're going to paint up the belt as if it was just leather, and then we'll be going onto the skulls a little bit later. Now it's Citadel Druchii Violet, and we're going to use this for all of the reds, or rather the cloak and the bolt rifle and the eye lenses. We're going to be using Carroburg Crimson on that big red ribbon that's sticking out of his shoulder. Like so. Next, Citadel Agrax Earthshade. Going to use this to do all of the gold. So tone it down nicely, give it a nice dark shade. And when we build up those layers a little bit later on, you'll get that nice contrast between the dark gold and the really light highlights. Now we're going to use Citadel Nuln Oil. Going to use this on all of the silvery metallics. And the final shade for now is going to be Citadel Carroburg Crimson. I'm going to use this on that little ribbon or parchment on the back. Now I'm going to use Vallejo White. I'm going to start working on that cloak and on the shoulder pads. So the way I'm working on this is the larger areas which are going to be really bright because they're pretty much all exposed in the light. I'm going to keep applying white to it to get that nice smooth white. Then as it sort of goes down to the underside of the cloak and you've got those ridges, they're going to be more of the contrast left in those recesses. And then so you haven't got that quite bold line between it, I usually feather the paint from the recess into the whiter sections. So I'll do a video on how to do that in the next couple of weeks. But now we're returning to the other side of the cloak. I'm going to start with Citadel Mephiston Red. And basically approach this the same as the white, so you're using the Mephiston Red in the general areas that be catching light, leaving the Druchii Violet in the recesses, and then where you have those creases and stuff like that, you want to try and feather in a little bit of the red from the shade out to where it is going to be flatter red. Now I'm going to highlight that with a little bit of Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet. Gives a really nice highlight to Mephiston Red, this one. It's slightly orangey, but it's brighter. It stands out enough you can see it for a highlight. The final highlight to the red cape is going to be Citadel Wild Rider Red. I'm going to use this to mainly do almost like edge highlights on the top of the crests of material, and also a few little bits where it'd be catching more light. That gives a nice final highlight on top of that for the cloth. Also using this on the bolt rifle and that too. So I've got a couple of little quick layers. We're using Citadel Khorne Red to begin with. This just to do the grip on his power axe. So it's got several bands, so you want to give them a nice smooth layer of Khorne Red, leaving the shade in the recesses. Now we have Citadel Wazdakka Red. We're going to paint about the top half of each part with this. And finally, a tiny little bit of pink horror. We're just going to do the very edge of each section with this. So a little tiny thin band of pink horror around the top of each of the bands on the grip. Next up, Citadel Rakarth Flesh. Use this to paint up the first layer on the robes and also the skeleton too. Now we're going to add some Vallejo White. We're just going to work on the tabard this time. So leave the skeleton for now, and we're just going to start highlighting the tabard. You can see that I haven't added any colour to the cross on the chest of the tabard there. I leave that till pretty much the very end when I'm working on the armour, and then just add it in one go there. I'm doing that cross in the same colour as the armour. So when you come to do the blacks and the greys, we'll be doing the same on that cross too. Now we're going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. We're just going to highlight that again. Now I'm just going to use Vallejo White. Mix that with the previous mix so it's quite off-white. I'd say it's not pure white, it's just slightly off. We're going to do one final highlight on the tabard. Like so. Now we're going to start working on the gold using Citadel Retributor armour to reapply that first layer. When you're reapplying this, you want to leave shade in the recesses and on the undersides too. So any areas that wouldn't be catching any light really, you want to make sure that they still have the shade on, so that darkens them down, gives it a little bit more of a look of natural lighting to it. To highlight the gold, we're now going to move on to Citadel Liberator Gold. This is a nice lighter shade of gold, so you want to be applying this to the top areas and that which would be getting more light than the Retributor armour sections or the shaded bits. Now we've mixed some Vallejo Model Chrome with the Liberator Gold. We're now going to highlight all these little bits. This one's used mainly for an edge highlight, or if you've got some big flat areas where you've put quite a bit of that Liberator Gold where it'll be catching the light, you can use this to just give that one final highlight and really brighten up a section of that so there's a lot of light catching that area. You want to mainly use this for edge highlights on the smaller sections, because the pigment from that Model Air Chrome really does brighten it up quite a lot and makes those little edges stand out where you've put it. Now we're going to use some Iron Hand Steel. We're just going to reapply some shine to the sections we used on this, like the chains, that little, almost like a lantern or whatever it is that's being painted there. Sections on the bolt rifle, on the power axe, chains that are hanging off them like they're going out of fashion. Don't forget those manacles that are kind of hanging the guy at the back too. Now I'm going to use Vallejo Model Air Chrome just to do some little highlights on some of the chains, and on some, like down the front of the power axe, some of the details on there, just to do some edge highlights. And as you can see, we're also adding the skulls to the belt. Now if you're really careful when you're adding this, you can add the chrome over the top of the Snakebite leather and the Baneblade brown, and the Snakebite leather will be dark enough in those eyes or the eye sockets that you don't need to shade and then reapply. You can just apply the Model Air Chrome to it because it is such good coverage, and that will give you those skulls on the front there. So after we reapplied the Rakarth flesh when we did the tabard earlier, we're now going to add some Citadel Ushabti bone just to give that skeleton a nice bony colour. Plenty of details on the skeleton. Its teeth and all them finger bones. You've got the metal frame holding it on. You've got all the bones on the back. There's plenty of details which will take you a bit of time there. Now we're going to add some white to the Ushabti bone and just give that one final highlight. You can also use this to do the skull, its feet as well. Or if like me you can forget about it and then realise when you come to do the base that you've got a skull to do and all your skull colours have dried up. Now I'm going to use some Vallejo White. Just using this to do the little sections on this lamp or whatever it is on the front. I'm going to use some shade to give that a bit of a fiery glow so there's something burning inside it. So give that a nice bit of white in each one of those little panes. Then we're going to use Citadel Cassandora Yellow. Blot some of that into each of these sections so those white cubes or white squares go yellow. Like so. Now I'm going to use Citadel Fugan Orange just to go around the very edges of this, so you want to get a little bit on your brush, not too much. I'm using, I think, a small layer brush here, so there's a decent point on it. I don't want to apply too much of the shade to it, but you're just putting the shade around the edges and that gives that orange glow with the yellow in the middle, so it makes it look like there's a bit of fire going on somewhere behind that. Now we're going to work on the edges of the belt using Citadel Balor Brown. What we're going to do is roughly go around the belt trim. It's really the only bit you can see of the belt because of those skulls. You're just going to go around the belt trim with the Balor Brown and pick that out. Doesn't matter if it's smooth because we're going to make it look a little bit rough and ragged anyway. Give that a reasonable coating of this. We can move on to the next colours. Now I'm going to use, or add, I should say, some Citadel Rakarth flesh to the Balor Brown. I'm going to do some nice vertical strokes along the length of the belt trim. I'll just give that rough, worn look. I like doing leather stuff so much. Once more, we're going to add some Rakarth flesh to the previous mix, and then we are going to do less but similar strokes going along the trim of that belt, just to get those bits looking a bit more rough and worn. I'm going to use some Citadel Mephiston Red. We're just going to put the colour back on the eye lenses, leaving a section at the front with the Druchii violet so it's a bit darker. Going to add a little bit of white to the Mephiston Red and just do a nice highlight at the back of the lens there. So you're going to be doing like a thin line going from the top back of the lens down to the bottom of the lens and along slightly, so you've got like a almost like a crescent line, like so. I'm going to add some more Vallejo White to the previous mix to lighten that and do a slightly smaller line. Like so. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of pure white. We're going to do a spot at the front of each lens and a tiny little line at the final highlight at the back where we've been doing those other ones. If you do, like I did on this right hand lens, manage to get the spot a little bit too big, just use a tiny little bit of Mephiston Red just to shrink that down so it's the same size as the other side. Now we're going to use some Citadel Mephiston Red, and we're just going to do the trim on this cloak. So choose how far you want the design to be from the edge, and all you want to do is make sure that wherever you draw that line it is that distance from the edge of the cloak. Now, there is some tatters and rips in his cloak, which makes that end a little bit rough and a bit varied, but as long as you keep it roughly the same length, so that if the cuts go too far into the cloak, the line is going to disappear into where the cut is. Just follow that all the way around the same length, and then you'll have that nice red line going around it. You use a tiny little bit of Rakarth flesh to paint the stripe on this campaign badge or crusade badge. We'll be doing a video on how to do that in the next week or two. Now we're going to use some Vallejo White, and this is going to be to do a little Templars cross on the top section here. Doesn't have to be perfect, this is probably about 1 mil in size or something like that. So just a little rough cross on there, it's fine. I'm going to use Vallejo Black, and we're going to start putting the black onto the armour colour. So any little overspills or anything like that, this is where you want to cover them up with the black colour that you use. I use the Vallejo Black because it gives really good coverage. It's a nice matte colour too, so it doesn't shine. Now we're going to use some Vallejo German Grey and start doing the highlights on his armour. So with this, I only put this on the areas that be catching the light. So you want to think about where the light from above will be catching him and highlighting those sections. Don't want to go too overboard and highlight all the way around each leg or all the way around each arm and that kind of thing, because otherwise you will end up with grey Templars rather than black ones. So I do try and keep the highlights kind of to a minimum with this. I'm going to use some Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm just going to pick out the details like underneath the eye lenses, any little ridges and things like that, just to make those stand out a little bit more. I tend not to do these underneath too much, I do some of them just if there's like the little horizontal details on the back of the leg and they're sort of stretching around underneath. I will give those a little bit of a line as well, because if you can see them from the sides it looks quite good. But I tend not to do the edge highlights above and below each detail. These are just the ones where the light would be catching it. So now we're going to use a little bit of Armour blue. On this we're going to draw the little electric kind of effect on the blade. We're going to start working on this just to give that nice little power axe kind of effect. I'll link up a video to this of how I've done this in the past on the power swords for the Bladeguard. I'm going to add some Vallejo White to the Armour blue, and we're just going to highlight this. Now where you're highlighting this is where you have the lightning kind of effect joining together, so where that little skull is, it's going to be slightly lighter than where you have the forks and the lightning. You want to make sure those forks are lighter than the little thin individual bits of lightning that are further away. If that made absolutely no sense, then hopefully the next few little bits of footage will clear that up a little bit. So adding a little bit more white to the previous mix. We're now going to do exactly the same but on smaller areas. I think I'm using an Army Painter Insane Detail brush here, or an equivalent of, I'm not too sure what it is to be honest. But it's the same size as the Insane Detail brush that I've got on my shelf. It works just as well. Now I'm going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix, and we're going to do another highlight on this. Like so. And finally we're just going to use a little bit of pure Vallejo White, just to put that final little highlight in those lighter parts of the lightning. Also going to put a little spot of white on the very edge of that blade where the lightning goes over the edge too. Like so. With that, the miniature is finished. It's a cracking miniature, really pleased with how it turned out. Some really great details to do on them too. Happy with that. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content, please consider supporting us on our Ko-fi and Patreon pages, linked below. Thanks very much.